How does one innovate and execute innovation? Boy, that's a loaded question, and it's a loaded question about sort of with three dimensions to it. The first is, of course, how big is the company? And it's going to have a big effect on how that company's going to innovate, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The second is the nature of the market that the company's competing in. Is it a market full of radical innovations or more tempered, large-scale innovations? And the third is what is the portfolio or the mix of what the company holds? So let me see if I can sort of tackle this all together. And I'll draw a metaphor for you that will maybe make this clear. Innovation comes to us from strategy, and strategy comes to us from military science. Military science is all about how do we advance our position and stay alive in the process of doing so. Well, innovation works in a very similar way, and that is the more radical the innovation, the less information or knowledge we have. And in fact, we often refer to this as an epistemological problem, meaning you can't know what you don't know yet. The classic sort of formation or way in which innovation gets operationalized is that there are experiments that are run in the company, and we often refer to this as the forward position. So think of this as scouts or recon units. Their job is to figure out where they are, where they're not, what's working, what's not working, what they're likely to do. They're usually very spread out. We call this spreading the portfolio array. And there's a lot of failure. This is often referred to as accelerating the failure cycle. So there's a lot of churn. We see a lot of venture capitalists work like this. I mean, imagine you invest in a lot of people and you try and turn the assets over. What you're trying to figure out very quickly is the key information about where the opportunities are. It's a really high-risk occupation, right? Just like recon. Well, once you figure that out, you have to do a couple things at the same time. You have to be able to focus on where the high-quality targets are. And you have to be able to sort of get through all of the, uncontested markets and adjacent opportunities and all the kinds of things that people get distracted on. Now you're at the point where you're saying, here are the three places where we have unique capabilities, we can get traction, and we can move relatively quickly on this. When those groups come in, they're usually intact teams, usually what we call heavyweight teams, which means they have a business charter. Their job is to get the ball rolling, if you will. And in the military, this would be the equivalent of the Marines taking the hill, taking the beach, those old John Wayne movies. Well, usually following that, there's a large issue around capability and a large issue around community. And what it means is, do we have the right people involved? And are we talking to the right clients? And are we collaborating with the right partners on this? And we have to involve those people. And it happens in almost the opposite way of these very focused kind of business, bulldogs that we've got. These people are more like young people are, millennials. They work very horizontally. They're on Facebook and they got their iPod, earphones in, and they're blogging each other, and 87 things are going on at the same time. But it's really around kind of connecting in the community, so you have some mass in which you can actually execute some of these ideas. That's a pretty tricky handoff, the handoff between these very focused business people and this kind of the community group, if you will. The final part is once you've figured out where the opportunities are and who's actually able to capture them and where the high-quality targets are, and you've got a pretty deep and diverse group of domain experts, and you've taken some shots on goal, the final part of this is you have to get to scale. And this is, out of all of the handoffs, this is where companies traditionally fail. It's what we call the commercialization phase. And so when we go back and we look at why companies don't work, it's this final step between new ideas and small groups and interesting little communities, and then saying, now we're going to have to get to scale at this. We're going to have to produce a lot of this. And that's where things typically fall. So let me give you a real good example right now that's going on in our economy. It's a really timely subject. If we were to look at alternative technologies for cars, automobiles, a lot of that technology already exists, and we're actually building cars that have some of these technologies on them. California, for example, has a lot of this type of activity. The challenge is most of these cars are very difficult to manufacture. We have ways of measuring this called manufacturability indexes. So the problem is, even though there's a lot of really interesting technology, if we were ever going to do this at scale, where there's a lot of turnkey systems and a right way and a wrong way and a lot of policies and procedures and intellectual property, it would be almost impossible, even doubling the size of these companies on a year after year basis for the next 50 years. It would be almost impossible to meet our targets for these types of alternative fuel vehicles. So what we're going to have to figure out is how to take these very forward-positioned companies and connect them back to what might be old mainline companies that have optimized manufacturing capability. And this is where the real challenge of, I think, the new innovation is happening. It's not just about being new. It's not just about being radical. It's about getting it through the pipeline, connecting all the dots, and doing it in a big enough way that you have a real economic impact.